Ever feel like you're standing in the middle of your own life and don't recognize it anymore? The kids are grown, your parents need more help, work feels different, and somewhere in the middle of all that change, you got lost. Most of us are told to power through, to stay busy, to keep moving. But what if slowing down is the one thing that could help you find yourself again? Today, we're talking about what happens when life changes faster than we can keep up, and how to create moments that help us all make sense of it. And don't forget to hit subscribe for more real insights. Today's guest is Elizabeth Barbour. Elizabeth is an author and speaker, and for more than 2 decades, she's helped people move through major life transitions with presence, clarity, and confidence. She's the author of Sacred Celebrations, Designing Rituals to Navigate Life's Transitions, a book that guides readers through simple, meaningful ways to honor change, whether it's a new beginning, an ending, or one of those in-between seasons that don't come with a rule book. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
There's this quiet kind of grief, I think, that sneaks up on women in midlife. We're going through so many changes and life starts to look entirely different. But most of us don't even take a moment to breathe. You, however, have made it your life's work to help people stop and honor those moments. What made you realize how powerful that pause can be?
That's a great question. I love how you opened us up, Holly. Thank you. For me, it was the death of my mother 9 years ago. And it was, she had been living with throat cancer for several years and fought it successfully for a few years, bought herself some more time, and then it returned. And it was in those final months, knowing that she was going to be leaving and doing the work of helping her to let go and helping me to let go, that really helped me put things in perspective, that nothing else really matters right now but the here and the now. We get so caught up in the chaos of, go, 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 do, have, make things happen, raising kids and working and all the things. But really, at the end of the day, what matters most, is these relationships that we've had, the love that we've shared, the things that we've experienced with our most intimates. And I really think it was during that time when Mom was dying, and then after she passed, that I really said, I have to do things a little bit differently. And thus is, which we'll talk about too, but that's how sort of my book was born, this idea of sacred celebrations. So,
have you found with the women that you've worked with that this is a very common theme? We're good at honoring the happy moments in life and being present with those celebrations. But when it starts to get heavy and sad, those are sometimes hard moments to stay in.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think that we tend to fill ourselves up with what Jennifer Loudon, who I know you interviewed here on your podcast, what she talks about in one of her books as shadow comforts. So whether that's food or alcohol or shopping or busyness, workaholism, whatever, we tend to distract ourselves because we don't want to sit with the grief. But the reality is that when we do take time to very intentionally be with the grief, see it, acknowledge it, honor it, and work through it, we're able to move through it. Maybe not quicker, sometimes more quickly, but certainly with more ease. And then we come out the other side instead of hanging on to it, which I think is what leads to the suffering.
Well, I think we're all really good at hanging on to things, unfortunately. That sometimes seems to be a superpower. But, well, how do we work through that, though? Did you find a way to honor your mother and be present in that moment when I'm sure you were grieving?
Yes, so I did. So in my book, I write about it. What I did was I worked with a shamanic practitioner. And then as a result of our work together, which I'll tell you about, I ended up training to become a shamanic practitioner myself. What we did was we really worked with Do you want me to tell you about it? Because it's kind of cool, actually.
It is kind of cool. No, yes.
Yeah. So what we did was we worked with white roses, and you can work with flowers, or there's other things you can work with, but we particularly worked with white roses. And what I did is I told my mom, I said, Mom, I know we're in this process of letting go, and I want to do some prayers and blessings for you. And she wasn't a particularly religious person at all. I was not raised in church. And I'm not really even totally sure what her beliefs were, but she just said, well, I can use all the prayers and blessings I could get right now, Elizabeth. So go ahead and, do what you're going to do. So what we did was I worked with her with a series of 3 dozen roses, and I would take the roses to her home and leave them with her for a couple of days. And my mentor and guide helped me connect with Mom and with the energy of the roses and with just sort of grief and loss and letting go. And then what I would do is I would go over and I would take the roses. I'd say, okay, Mom, your roses they're ready to go. And she would sort of be like, okay. I said, I promise I'll bring you some more. And then what I did was I took the roses to a creek near my house. I was actually living in Houston, Texas at the time. And I took the flowers to the creek and I released them in a very ceremonial way. I did this 3 different times. So the first set of roses that I did the release work with, I was a blubbering mess. I mean, just all of the emotion, all of the fear, the anguish, the grief, the loss, just all of it, knowing that my mom was going to die. And when I threw the roses into the water, they kind of stayed in a really tight bunch. And then they went down the river together. The second time I went was a different experience. I went to the bridge, I got her roses, I went to the bridge, and this was about 2 weeks later. And I released the roses again. And this time, when they fell into the water, a couple of them were bunched together, but a couple had sort of separated. And so there was a loosening, if you will. And my emotional state was still sad, and I was crying, and there were tears, and there was grief. But it was a little bit more peaceful. It was like, oh, okay, we're doing this. And then the third time I went and released the roses, it was the most remarkable experience because all dozen roses spread out like, remember playing pickup sticks?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And so you drop the sticks and you want them to just kind of go everywhere. And all dozen roses went completely different ways. It was like they were freed. And my emotional state was one of joy and delight and lightness and freedom. And it was just a few days after that final release that she actually transitioned and passed away. And so it was a series of rituals, but it was this really powerful experience of being in the moment and helping her to process her emotions as the proxy, sort of as the midwife or doula, if you will.
Yes.
But then also it helped me to process my own.
Do you think that's the key to moving through so many of life's transitions is really learning to be present in that moment?
Absolutely. I do. I think presence is key. And the other thing I think is really important is witnessing. I think is witnessing one another. Like in my case, I was witnessing my mom in her process. But then after she died, I hosted, about 5 days later, I hosted something that I called a White Rose Ceremony. And I invited women friends from all different phases of my life, my book club, my Zumba class, church, my neighbors. And I invited them to come to my house. And we had, I wouldn't call it, it wasn't a funeral, and it wasn't even really a memorial. It was a celebration and honoring of mothers and our relationship with the mothers in our lives. And I gave everybody white roses at that. And then we all walked down to the bridge where I had done that work with my mom. And after I talked about her and her life, and we talked about mothers and the important role that, moms and aunties and grandmas and sisters, all the women in our lives play, we all released our white roses into the water in honor of the women in our lives. So it wasn't just about my mom, it was about all of the women relationships. And in that case, my community was witnessing me in my grief, but they benefited from it too. So I think when we can witness and show up for others, it's a two-way street because we all benefit from that.
Yes, you mention community quite a lot in your book, and I have a copy of it here. How important is it for us to share those moments, not just by ourselves, because we can do that, but within community?
Oh, I think it's everything. And a more recent example I can share is that I live in Asheville, North Carolina. So if you followed the news last year, Hurricane Helene just absolutely devastated our region. And I had lived through Hurricane Harvey in Texas back in 2017. So I'd had some experience with it, but this was a whole new level of trauma and loss. And I mean, loss of life, loss of homes, we didn't have water for, 2 months in the whole city. I mean, imagine not
I
having
can't
water.
even imagine
Yeah.
something as simple as that you take so for granted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in that experience, because it was so shocking and so traumatic, community is what helped everybody to get through. It was checking on your next door neighbor, your elderly neighbor, and saying, what do you need? Do you need water? Do you need food? Can I go get your medicine? It was coming together. The city hosted a candlelight vigil. It was maybe a week or two after the storm had come, and everybody just came together, and there was music and poetry and, storytelling about, how do we honor and acknowledge what was lost, but also how do we lift one another up and carry through. And there continue to be rituals and ceremonies. I mean, we just passed the 1 year mark since the hurricane here, and there's still a long way to go. I mean, I think we're going to be a lot like New Orleans was with Katrina. It's probably going to be a decade before the city is, fully restored
Right.
to its magnificence. And lots of parts are bouncing back, and people are too. But yet the region will forever be changed. So it's that community element that I think is what's lifting people up and, helping them get through it.
I find it so interesting when you're talking about looking out for your neighbors because there weren't a lot of resources for anybody at the time. But I think as a community, you think, well, what do I have? What do you need? What can I give? And it's in times like that I think our strengths show up for us. Did you see patterns of that within these stories?
Oh, absolutely. So I have some friends who lived east of Asheville in an area called Black Mountain. And when the storm came in, the road to their community, so they sort of lived up on a mountaintop, the road to their community was washed away. And they were not able to get a car out for, I don't even remember the exact timeline, like 7 to 10 days, something like that. And so it got to the point where helicopters were dropping in supplies for the people. So I think there were about 25 or 30 people up on the mountaintop. And what my friends shared, I had two personal friends who were up in that group. And what they shared was that they just came together every morning as a community and said, okay, what do we have? So obviously on the first day, it was like, okay, what do we have? What are our resources? How much water? How much food? What does everybody have in their freezers? I think there were maybe 2 or 3 people who had generators. So it was like, okay, so we're going to sign up for times. And if you want to go, charge up your phone or charge up, whatever, if you had a medical device or whatever. And they just worked together and they had daily meetings and all checked in and they just pulled their resources and shared with one another. That's one example. Another one is for me. So I actually wasn't here when the storm hit. I was out of town. And so what happened was when I returned, I checked in with all my people who were here and I said, what do you need? What can't you resource in Asheville? And what can I go to Charlotte and get for you? And then I'll bring it in. So one thing I bought was a chainsaw. Because, one of my friend, he had burned through 2 chainsaws and he said, we've got all these trees down and no one can go anywhere. He said, can you bring me, and not a crappy not a crappy chainsaw from Walmart. He's like, I need like the big expensive heavy one that will, work for, years on end. And so things like that. So there were a lot of us who were out of town or maybe were able to get out, and then we would go and get supplies and then we would bring it back in. But I did fundraising. I mean, that was my contribution. I raised several $1,000s from all over the country because I was telling the stories on Facebook and sending pictures that my friends were sending me. And so it was this community effort of how can we all support in this time of crisis right now. So
I mean, that's a wonderful, like, real life example. Horrible, but just goes to
yes.
show you how much we can be present for one another when things really start to go south. Now, if we take that back to everyday life, has there been a moment, and this is metaphorically, where you needed somebody to show up with a chainsaw in your life?
That is a great question. Yes, actually, not exactly a chainsaw, but yeah, but show up with emergency supplies. Yes. Yeah. So actually, it's funny we're talking about this. So before the hurricane, the year before the hurricane, I was actually in a near fatal car accident.
Oh,
I was driving on a road, like a 4-lane highway, well, I guess a 5-lane highway, and another car pulled in front of me, and I hit him. I hit him head on at full speed. I was probably doing 55 miles an hour, something like that. It was a time where I was unable to work. I was unable to care for my daughter. Was really unable to function. Amazingly, I didn't have any broken bones. I didn't have any punctured organs, but I was severely beat up and had a concussion, had a really bad concussion. So I was getting treatment at a local brain center, but I couldn't drive. So I had to have lots of people bring their chainsaws. So some people were bringing food, others were, giving me rides to go to the doctors every day. Other people were taking care of my daughter. I had to just let work kind of pause for a few months while I recovered. But yeah, that was one of those examples. I think about, is it Stephen Covey and the, seven, what is it, seven habits
habits
of
of,
highly effective people?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah. And he talks about the emotional bank account. And sometimes you make deposits, and you help other people. And sometimes you have to withdraw. And so that was my experience of having to withdraw because I was helpless. I had to surrender and say, I really need help. And, people showed up in droves, which is wonderful. It felt so good to have that community of friends who just loved and cared for me and were able to help me through that time. So,
Yeah, and just being open to the help because I know a lot of times it's hard to ask, but it is hard to receive.
yes, it is. And I think, and then I've been curious about this for you with your experience with the women that you're working with too. I find that when we're younger, we tend to think, oh, I can handle this on my own, and I'm independent and I'm a strong woman. But that the older we get and the more life we experience, raising children, caring for elderly parents, managing workplaces, or whatever it is that we're doing, we realize, oh, I can't really do this alone. I mean, I can, but I'm not going to be as effective. And it's going to be a lot easier if I ask for help. And so I find that, at least with my group of friends, we're all mostly in our 50s ish, some 40s, some 60s and 70s. But the older we get, the wiser we get, and then it gets easier to ask for help. Whereas when we're younger, it's a little more a sense of pride, like, oh, I don't need help. I can do this.
Yeah, that is so true. Well, you know what it was back, and this was a long time ago when I first started my menopause community. I did it because I was looking for answers, and I thought there's got to be other women out there who know what's going on, and I didn't want to do it alone. And so, with you saying that, over the years, I have seen that within the community that women put something out there. This is what I'm struggling with. I can't find the answers. I don't want to do this alone. And then all these other women come in and be like, wait, I got this. I've been there. I saw that. I did that. And it is so powerful and it makes us feel so much better when we know that we're not alone and that our struggle is also something that somebody else has seen.
Well, that's exactly it. I think it's sharing our stories. It's, Brene Brown talks about that we really connect with people when we share our vulnerabilities. And when we can get to that place of saying, wow, I'm struggling or I'm having a hard time or I'm challenged by this. What you just said made me think about a couple years ago, I had to have a hysterectomy. I had been dealing with fibroids for a good decade, and it was just finally time. And none of my friends in my immediate circle had a hysterectomy. So I went to, there was some, I don't even remember what it is now, but there was a women's group on Facebook that I was a member of, and it was people all over the country. And so I just put in a post and I said, hey, I'm preparing for this surgery. What tips and advice do you have? Do you know, women came out of the woodwork and they were so helpful and they were kind and they were encouraging. There was no judgment about, oh, why are you having this surgery? You could do it another way. It was like, okay, like this is your path. We're going to support you. Here are the tips and tricks that helped me. So after I went through my own experience, I've had a few friends since then who have had hysterectomies. And I'm like, can I please offer some of the tips that these other ladies gave me? Like simple things like make sure you have a pillow in the car when you drive home from the hospital so that you put it over your belly. So whoever is driving you, if they have to stop short at a stoplight, it protects you from the seatbelt. Like such a simple thing, but it really, really helped because I had like a 45-minute drive to the hospital, so.
Right, right. And it's just things that you don't normally think of. Well,
Yeah.
as long as we're on the topic of hysterectomies and menopause, that's just one of those big shifts in a woman's life. And I think we don't really honor that transition because it feels like just something that we have to get through. And there's a little bit of grief over the loss of fertility and all of those things. Have you found ways to honor that transition?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So one of the chapters in my Sacred Celebrations book talks about women's transitions. And so when we shift from maiden to mother to crone, and I have participated in several croning ceremonies for women that really help them to step into and embrace this new area of life. Because you think about it, when we go through menopause, suddenly we feel free, we feel wiser. We have a little bit more of a, well, I don't really care what people think about me attitude. That when you're in your 20s and 30s, you're always worried, like, oh, how do I look? Or did I say the right thing or whatever? And then when you're 50, you're like, who cares? Like, I'm just going to be me. I'm just going to show up. So there's freedom that comes with that. Designing some kind of a ritual, whether it's a private one or you do it with friends or with your sisters or your moms or your aunties, whoever it is, but designing a ritual to really honor that and step fully into your power as a wise woman. If we look at indigenous cultures around the world, they revere their elders and they go to them for advice and support and wisdom. And what do we do in the Western culture? We put our elders in a nursing home,
Yep.
and we separate them instead of saying, wait, wow, they've experienced all of this life. How can we use their guidance to help us as we're growing in our careers and raising our families and, doing all the things. So.
Yeah, because you know that they're looking at us going, if she would only ask the question, I think I could help her out here.
It's so true. But when we're younger, we don't want to ask because we still think we know it all. But I think you sort of get to that, you get to that middle life and you go, oh, maybe my elders do know a thing or two. And, maybe I should ask that.
Yes. There are a lot of big moments in our life that I feel deserve celebration, but it doesn't always have to be this big act, right? You could do little things. And because I read through the book and just the simple thing, like starting your day and starting it slow and having those moments. Is that something that you do on a daily basis? You practice yourself?
So that's a great question. When my daughter was young and I had my mom that I was caring for as well. I absolutely needed to take that time in the morning.
Mhm.
And so I would usually get up an hour before everybody else and I would do yoga in the morning and I would drink my cup of tea and I would set my intentions for the day. And that would, because it was really the only time that I got to myself. But now that I have a teenager and she's sort of off doing her things, my rhythm is a little different. I do still take time for myself every day, but often that's in the form of maybe going for a walk or going for a hike. As I said, I live in Asheville, North Carolina, so the mountains here are spectacular this time of year. So I might get up in the morning and just kind of get on with my day. Like this morning was one of those. But then, at 5 o'clock in the evening, after I've had a full work day, then I'm going to go take an hour and I'm going to go be outside in, the sort of the golden evening light. And, I have a place near my house, which is the soccer fields. And so I love walking near the soccer fields and watching all the kids out there playing and the parents cheering them on. I'm in my own little world as I'm doing the walking, but I'm sort of witnessing and watching that fun and that energy. So yeah, so I absolutely take time on a regular basis, and I would say probably more so now that I'm older because I know how critical it is. So whether it's taking time to sit and read a book, or write in my journal, or maybe do some prayer time. One thing I do, I keep an ancestral altar because a lot of my loved ones have passed on.
Right.
I'm actually adopted and in reunion with my birth family, so I have four parents, my mom and dad who raised me, my adoptive parents, and then my birth mom and birth dad. And, three of the four have passed on, both my adoptive parents and my birth mom. So, I have an ancestral altar where I have their photos and, every couple days I'll go and sit with them, maybe bring some flowers, bring a little bit of some kind of an offering and just communicate with them. And for me, that's very grounding to remember that, I stand on the shoulders of giants and there were, dozens and hundreds and thousands of people who came before me to allow me to be here in this present form. And so just sort of honoring them and their wisdom. So that's part of my practice too.
I'm really fascinated by this topic because I spoke to a woman several months ago. She's an author. Her name is Rebe Huntman, and she wrote a book called My Mother in Havana. And it was all about honoring those who came before us. And she talked about having an altar in her home and what it meant for her to be able to just kind of check in with that part of her on a daily basis. And especially at points in time when you're feeling kind of low and you're like, oh, I really miss whomever. And you could kind of connect with them in that moment.
It's so true. I will say, so my daughter just started high school in August, and and she stayed at the same school, which is actually a 5 through 12. So I figured, this is not going to be a big deal. She did middle school. We're just moving from downstairs to upstairs, same routine, same, traveling, whatever. And the day I dropped her off for high school, I just started sobbing in the car as soon as I dropped her off. And I was like, what is wrong with you, Elizabeth? And then I realized, oh, wait a minute. Like, don't judge this. This is yet another transition. It's another threshold. And the first thing I did was I came back to my home and I went to my ancestral altar and I talked to both of my mothers. And I was like, all right, I'm like, how do I do this? Like, you both did this. Like, how do I do this? And give me your wisdom and guidance. And, I don't even remember exactly, but I just kind of felt like they were saying, it's okay. And every mother goes through this, and this is just part of the journey. But I immediately settled down, just taking a few minutes to connect with them and feel like I was getting resourced by them.
Well, because you obviously weren't even expecting that to be a moment in your life. But that brings up a good point. Life has a tendency to sneak up on us like that in different ways. And have you ever found yourself crying in the grocery store because you heard a song on the radio that made you think of something? Okay. So how do we handle you when we don't have the access to go back home? Maybe we're out in public somewhere. Do you have a little tip for handling those moments?
That is such a great question, Holly. And I think it is so important for us to get in touch immediately. Like, what is the feeling? What am I experiencing? Is it grief? Is it anger? Is it frustration? Whatever. And then find a way. So let's say you're driving. I think that's a great
Yes.
example.
Yes.
Um, it's like, okay, so what do I need to do in this moment so that I can tend to this? And maybe you can tend to it fully in the moment, or you just need to do something to tide you over until you can get to a place where you can tend to it. So, it can be anything from, picking a song on the radio, and saying, okay, I'm going to listen to this song and maybe it's going to allow me to cry so I can just sort of naturally release my tears. Or if I'm angry, maybe I pick like a rage song and I just kind of like yell the lyrics and yell, scream really loud and sing, in that angry song mode that we can do. Sometimes it does involve pulling off to the side of the road. Of course, we want to be safe about these things, right? But sometimes you just pull off to the side of the road and maybe you just sit there and you have a good cry. You sit with your legs and do a little bit of bilateral tapping on your thighs to just kind of calm your system down. I had a teacher and a mentor years ago who used to like to do toning, where you do sort of this guttural voice thing where you just kind of, oh, well, that's more like singing. Well, not good singing, but you bring your voice up and it's coming from the throat and you just kind of allow it to move through you. And you just kind of tone until you don't have any breath left. And then you're like, okay, I moved that through. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. Sometimes it's even, if you have, say you're on your way someplace and you have 5 extra minutes, like get out of the car and go hug a tree or stand on the earth or lay down on the earth. In fact, I have an experience about that. So I told you about my car accident 2 years ago. And about a year ago, so I was back to driving, I was healthy, everything was fine. And my daughter and I were on our way to see a musical concert. And a car pulled in front of me in traffic almost exactly like the other driver who had actually hit me. And I had a total trauma response. He didn't actually hit me, the second driver.
Right.
But I completely freaked out. And it was just me and my daughter in the car. And of course, she's not of driving age. So I said, honey, I have to pull over right now. And so within a minute, I maneuvered myself off of the 5-lane highway because it was an exact same like 5-lane situation. I pulled off in the highway and I said, I need to get out of the car. And she was like, okay, mommy, are you okay? I said, I am, but I'm not going to be able to drive if I don't do this. And so I got out of the car. I pulled up next to a tree. I went over and I just like hugged down the tree. I was like crying and shaking. I think about it sort of like, when a dog, an animal has a stress response, what's the first thing they do? They shake. They shake
Yes.
it off. And then they're able to release it and then they move on. So that's what I was doing. I was hugging the tree. I was kind of shaking and yelling and moving. And my daughters were like, are you okay? I'm like, I am. I'm like, don't be freaked out. Like, this is okay. I'm just moving it. I took my shoes off and I just put my feet flat on the ground. And it maybe took me 5 minutes. And it was enough to calm me down. And, and of course I was doing some self-talk, like he didn't hit me. I'm totally safe. Riley's fine. We're okay. And then I was able to get in the car and drive. And I didn't have any other ill effects from it. But I took time in that moment. And if I hadn't done that, I think I probably would have continued to be traumatized because I would have been replaying it over and
Yes.
over again.
And I think the importance of that is recognizing when we need to just take a moment and step back and figure out what's going on, because there's all these things, you could feel it all in your body. And you're right. If you kept driving, you needed to address it then, not 2 hours later or not when you were laying in bed at night. I think that's where we tend to get ourselves in a little trouble, when we dismiss that feeling in the moment and saying, I can't do this right now. I've got it. And sometimes we can't, but sometimes you have to.
Right. Well, and I think that's exactly right. And I think sometimes we can't, but sometimes we also think we can't because it's not socially acceptable. I'm thinking like, say you're out at a dinner party and someone says something that really triggers you and you think, oh, I can't really, I can't excuse myself. But you know what? It's easy enough to just say, will you excuse me for a minute? I need to go to the ladies' room. I'll be right back. and you excuse yourself for the conversation and you go to the ladies' room and you have your cry or your scream or whatever it is, whatever that was brought up for you. And then you can bring yourself back into the conversation. So I think it's also about giving ourselves permission to take the time to be present. Because I think a lot of times we gloss over it. We go, oh, we'll be okay. I'm being overly emotional or overly reactive. No, you're really not. It's a physiological, biological response to whatever is in the moment. And the sooner you can address it, the sooner you can calm down and get back to homeostasis. So,
Yes, because I hate when I do that to myself when I think, oh, I'm making a big deal out of something. But clearly, somewhere inside all of this, it is a big deal.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. And I think, I don't know about you, but I know when I was young, my feelings were often discounted. Oh, you're overreacting. Oh,
Yes.
stop crying. Oh, it's not that big of a deal, like you just said. And so we get that conditioning when we're children. But when we're adults, it's important for us to tend to our own responses and say, no, my emotions are valid. They're not good or bad. They just are what they are. And then I think that when we can be at peace with that's what allows us to move through things a lot quicker.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I was the baby in a family of four, and I think by the time I came along, nobody wanted to deal with any of this
Oh,
shenanigans. So, yes,
oh.
I get what you're saying because even though I'm a grown woman in my 50s, there are still moments where I realize, you know, Holly needs a little bit of comfort right now. And that's
Right.
important to recognize.
And do you give yourself permission to do that now?
I'm getting better at it.
Good.
Yes. Can we talk about your book for a moment? It's called
Sure.
Sacred Celebrations, um, Designing Rituals to Navigate Life's Milestone Transitions. How did you decide on what transitions you wanted to put in the book? And do you want to maybe talk about your favorite?
Okay. Uh, well, I already shared one of them, which was the white rose ritual around surrounding my mom and her death. So, so it's a two-part question. Let me start with, how did I decide what to include? I wanted to include the major life transitions that we all are familiar with. The birth of a baby, the arrival of a child in the world, getting married, buying a house, maybe getting divorced, maybe the death of a loved one. Those are things that are pretty universal. But I wanted people to realize that there's not just one way that you do those things, that you can have your own personal spin, your own influence, your own preferences, and how you want one of those events to look like. And I'll give an example. A couple years ago, we had, I think, 7 different deaths in our family and friend circle. And so my daughter and I attended 4 different funerals together. And all 4 funerals were completely different. And some of them were called celebrations of life, some were called funerals. But it was so fascinating to be able to talk with her and get her responses and say, wow, I really liked that one because it was really heartfelt and they told stories. And ooh, that one felt really cold and sterile because they didn't really talk about the person that much. They just sort of had a more traditional church service, and the man who was singing was really off key, and so it was really fascinating to, one was held outside near a horse barn because the person who happened to be a dear friend of mine, she passed away. She was a horse lover. And so it was held outside. So my daughter was able to sort of see all these different ways that we can celebrate and honor. And so I love that because that's what I tried to convey in the book is give people different stories, different ideas. Here's different ways that this could look for you. And then I offer people questions and say, well, what's important to you? What elements do you want to include? Who are the people that you want to include? And then I help them design their own rituals. So I think that's where my book is maybe a little bit different than some others that are out there, is that it's not prescriptive. It's not like, get this herb and get this candle and get this, whatever. It's
Right.
more, what are the elements that you want and that are important to you, and how can you put them together to design a ritual that's meaningful for you and your loved ones. So yeah, so the chunk of the main section of the book, as you know, is all those big life rituals that we talked about. But then the third section of the book is really about the daily rituals that we can do. Having a gratitude practice, saying grace with your family, dinner every night, keeping the ancestral altar. How do we honor holidays? All of those are all part of our more day to day. How can we keep ritual alive and present in our everyday world? So I try to cover the big stuff and the
Yes.
daily stuff.
Well, for women in midlife who are watching this right now and they're struggling through many, many of these transitions, what is one thing you wish that they would take the time to do for themselves so that they could start to find their way back?
My first thought when you said that was about some kind of a daily grounding practice. And that's going to be different for everybody. For some people, it might be, walking out. I'm looking out at my patio, which has, beautiful leaves right now for the fall colors, and, walking out every morning and taking my cup of tea and just communing with the trees and with the deer and the squirrels and everybody who's in my backyard. For somebody else, that might be doing a yoga practice for 10 minutes in the morning to just stretch and wake up their body. For somebody, it might be pulling out their Bible or some other kind of spiritual reading that inspires them, and sitting quietly and having like a daily devotional. For other people, it could be, calling your best friend or, whatever. Like, it's going to be different for everybody, but it's what helps you to feel grounded and centered and solid, so that then that becomes your foundation for your day. And then when things get topsy-turvy throughout the day, how can you bring yourself back to that?
Well, I think one of the reasons why I asked that particular question is because there was something that you said in the book. Is it okay if I read it to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
You had commented to a friend of yours and you said, "I'm a new version of me." And she said, "No, Elizabeth, you're really just rediscovering the real you." And she's been buried these past few years. And when I read that, I just thought, so many women, I think, feel this way. And how do we begin to dig ourselves out of that?
That was my dear friend Christy. Thank you. I remember exactly where we were when she said that, and that was like 25 years ago. Really powerful. I'm glad that you really resonated with that. I think how we do that, it's a couple ways. I think one is we have to keep coming back to ourselves. I think as women in midlife, we spend so much of our time and energy on the others, on our children, on our partner, on our parents, on our neighbors, on the volunteering at the PTA, on taking care of the people at work, making sure I bring in cookies on Friday because I told everybody I would, whatever. So we're always giving and nurturing and caring about other people. And we don't even put ourselves in the top 5 on our list of, to care for. So I think it starts with getting back to yourself. Like, what do I need? Maybe it's sitting with a journal and saying, who am I right now at this point in my life? And where are my needs being met? And where are my needs not being met? And what do I need to do to fill up my own cup? Because I can't necessarily wait for other people to do that for me. Now, what I can do is I can ask other people for their help and support. But it starts with me identifying, okay, what is it that I want and need right now? But then I do think the other part of that, so I think it's as much about your relationship with yourself as it is also with a higher power, whatever that is for you. But I think that it's important to have our spiritual connection and to feel grounded in that. But then it's also really about the other people in our lives. It's about making sure, you've heard the saying that we're the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with.
Yes, I have heard that.
Yeah, I think it was Jim Rohn who said that. And so if you think about like who are the 5 people that you're spending the most time with, and how's that working for you? And if it's not working so well for you, then you want to take a look at, who else do I need to bring into my life that is maybe more positive or more supportive or understands me at a different level. Like I can give an example of that in my own life. I'm now writing my 3rd book, which is about living in reunion for people touched by adoption. So I've been in reunion with my birth family for 26 years, and I'm also an adoptive mama, and we've been in reunion with part of her birth family for the last 5 years. And I hadn't realized, so I started writing this book about a year and a half ago, and I hadn't realized that I didn't really have much community in the adoption world. And now I have friends who are fellow adoptees and fellow adoptive moms and birth mothers. And I'm developing, and I haven't dropped my other friends. I mean, because I love them and they've been in my life in some cases for 20 and 30 years. But I've added this new group of friends who speak a similar language to me. And that's been incredibly enriching and incredibly healing for me. Plus, it's helping me write the book.
Right.
But personally, I'm getting some understanding and witnessing from only other people who've been through it. So it's kind of like, if you're the first person in your friend group to get married, and then all your friends are still single and they don't understand, like, well, what do you mean you want to stay home and watch Netflix with your husband? Like, what? We're going out partying. And you're like, yeah, no, I'm going to stay home. Or like if you're the first person in your friend group to have a baby and everybody else is still out, going on weekend trips. And you're like, yeah, no, nap time is at, 3:00, can't leave. And then the same, if you're the first person in your friend group to get divorced, so it's like, you've got to find the other people who have had the similar experiences as you.
Yes.
So I think that's a big way of how we find our way back to ourselves, is to look at, who am I? What are my values? What's important to me? What are my life experiences? And then making sure that we're surrounded by people who really see and honor and acknowledge those experiences.
You need to find the people to kind of meet you where you're at in that moment.
Yeah.
And fill you up from that point.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I would even add too, people who are a little bit further along in the journey than you. So much of your work, as you said, is about, midlife and menopause. And so in many cases, right, that's for women in sort of their 40s and 50s. But then looking to our mentors, I have now several friends who are in their 70s now. And they're retired, and they're like, oh, you're so busy. I'm like, well, yeah, that's because I'm running a business and I'm writing a book and I'm raising a kid, and and they're like, oh, we forgot what that was like.
So true.
But they often have really good wisdom to share because they're, 15, 20 years ahead of me in this journey of life. And so they're able to offer reflections that are really helpful.
Before I let you go today, though, where can we find you? Where can we follow along on your journey?
So I have 2 websites. So elizabethbarbour.com, and Barbour is spelled Barbour. And then also sacredcelebrations.com. And not only do I have the book there, although you can get it on Amazon and Bookshop and other places too. But if you want a signed copy, go to my website and order it from me there. But on Sacred Celebrations, I also have a product line. So I make intentional gemstone jewelry there. And I also have some gift kits. We have a self-care kit and a house blessing kit. So those are nice ritual kits. They're great for the holidays to give to people. And then on social media, I'm active on Facebook. I have a Facebook group called Sacred Celebrations. So you can either, Google that, Facebook group, Sacred Celebrations, or you can just find me there. I'm also on LinkedIn, Instagram. yeah, I would love it for people to come and especially for them, to send me a little message and say, hey, I saw you, on Holly's podcast and would love to connect. So I always love hearing from folks that way. So,
Well, I just want to again say thank you so much for being here today. And this was just such a lovely conversation. And I'm so happy that I found you and I found your book.
well,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Holly. I really appreciate it. You're doing great work for women in midlife. I really appreciate it. I'll be sharing this and your work with my friend group as well. So
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on Real Insights. If you want to hear more stories about how other women find their way through change, order your copy of Empart, Real Stories, Real Wisdom, Real Menopause on Amazon today. And don't forget to join the conversation at joinempart.com. Until next time, remember that menopause is a journey, but you're not alone.